The air in the church was thick with lilies, their cloying scent wrapping around my throat, like a memory I couldn't shake. I sat in the last pew, my hands clasped tight fingers, digging into the worn fabric of my black dress, the one I'd pulled from the back of my closet for too many farewells. This was my brother's funeral. David, the boy I'd raised when our parents drifted away like smoke. The man I'd stitched together after bar brawls fed when his pride left him hollow-loved when he was too lost to love himself. I opened the program, my hands trembling, and found nothing. Not my name. Not a mention of Charlotte Taylor's sister. No seat, save no nod to the years I'd given him. I was erased. Their eyes grazed me, those who thought they knew my story. Aunts with pursed lips, their hymnals held like barriers. Cousins who sneered as I slipped in my coat, damp from the drizzle outside my face, etched with lines that 48 years had carved too deeply. She's nothing, their glances whispered sharp as broken glass. Just Charlotte the spinster, who never left this tired town. I kept my gaze down my breath shallow. Silence is my refuge, a language I've mastered. It stitches you together when the world tries to pull you apart, thread by fragile thread. The preacher's voice rose and fell, weaving a portrait of David, his easy charm, his laughter, that could fill a room, his light that everyone claimed to miss. The congregation nodded, their handkerchiefs pressed to their eyes, caught in a story polished for the occasion. No one spoke of the nights I held him as he shook, sweat-soaked and scared. No one mentioned the money I scraped together to clear his debts, the secrets I locked away to keep his name untarnished. No one asked about the years I spent carrying him. My shoulders bowed under the weight of his choices. No one ever asks. I sat there, my fingers brushing the pew's smooth wood, worn by generations of grief. I wondered if I'd fade entirely one day, my edges blurring, until I was nothing but a shadow in someone else's tale. The organ's low notes vibrated through the floor, pulling me somewhere else for a moment, somewhere sharp with the smell of cordite, loud with the hum of radios, heavy with the stakes of choices no one in this church could fathom. My eyes snapped open, my heart thudding. Not now, not here. I buried the memory deep where it belonged, sealed behind the oaths I'd sworn long ago. The congregation shifted their murmurs, a soft current, beneath the preacher's words. I felt Karen before I saw her, my sister-in-law poised by the casket, her black dress clinging to her like a second skin. Her tears artfully streaked. She didn't look at me, not once. I caught her voice later, soft but cutting, as she leaned toward a neighbor in the pew ahead. Charlotte, she's just here, just here. The words sank into me, cold and heavy like stones in a river. I didn't flinch, though my chest ached as if I had. I've learned to hold pain close to let it settle in my bones without a sound. The service drew to a close, and the mourners rose, drifting toward the front, to offer condolences, to clasp hands, to pose for pictures that would live on mantelpieces. I stayed where I was, my purse gripped tight, its leather soft, from years of carrying my life's small necessities. I was ready to leave, to slip away, as I always did, unnoticed, when a hand touched my sleeve. Ms. Taylor. The voice was low, steady, slicing through the chatter like a blade. I looked at my breath, catching into the face of a stranger, an older man in a suit so crisp it seemed to hold the weight of authority. His eyes were too keen, too, knowing for this small-town sorrow. His tie was knotted with care, his shoulders squared, in a way that spoke of discipline, of places where orders were given and followed. I knotted my mouth dry. He leaned closer, his voice a whisper meant only for me. We'll speak soon. Then he was gone, swallowed by the crowd before I could find words. My pulse raced a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. I've heard voices like that before, in rooms where silence was power, where lives hung in the balance of a single decision. I told myself it was nothing, just Charlotte seeing shadows where there were none, just Charlotte alone as always. but the air had shifted, charged with a current I couldn't ignore. I stood smoothing my dress, the fabric damp from the rain I'd walked through. The church doors loomed ahead, promising escape. I stepped outside, the gray drizzle cold against my skin, the gravel crunching under my worn heels. The steeple rose into the mist, a silent witness to the grief inside. I glanced back, watching the mourners spill out their voices, loud with memories of David, his smile, his stories, his life. My name wasn't among them. I'd been written out my place, in his story, erased as easily as a line in the sand. I walked to my car, the rain weaving trails down my face, mingling with tears I hadn't meant to let fall. The engine coughed to life, reluctant but familiar, and I drove past the church one last time. The parking lot was crowded, cars gleaming under the storm's dim light, their owners caught in the theater of mourning. I pressed the gas the road, stretching out, blurred by the rain, and the weight in my chest. Leaving quietly is what I do best. It's what I've always done. But that stranger's voice lingered his words, circling like a hawk. Ms. Taylor, he'd said it with purpose, with recognition. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles whitening, and tried to push it away. I was Charlotte Taylor, the woman no one saw, the one they forgot to name. Yet somewhere deep in a place I rarely dared to touch, a spark flickered something old, something fierce. I've carried secrets heavier than this grief, secrets that could change the air in a room, secrets I'd buried under years of silence. I'd been someone else, once someone who stood tall, in places these people couldn't imagine. But that Charlotte was gone, or so I'd told myself. I pulled into my driveway, the rain drumming a steady rhythm on the car's roof. I sat there, the world quiet, except for the storm's soft pulse. If you're watching this, if you're here with me now, I need you to hold on. This story isn't what it seems. It's not about loss or family or the sting of being forgotten. It's about what happens when the truth comes for you, when it steps out of the shadows and demands to be seen. Hit that subscribe button, because I'm going to tell you everything not for me, but for the ones who've been overlooked, the ones whose names were never spoken. I stepped out the rain, soaking through my dress, and walked to my door. The house was still its silence, a comfort I'd grown to trust. I didn't know it then, but something was stirring. Something that would break the quiet I'd wrapped my life around. Something that would make them all see not just me, but the woman I'd been all along. The rain followed me home that day, a steady patter against my windows. As I sat in the dark, the funeral program crumpled in my lap. My house was small, its walls lined with shelves of books I'd read too many times, their spines cracked from years of turning to them for company. The silence was familiar, but tonight it felt heavier, like it was waiting for me to speak. I didn't. I never do. Instead, I closed my eyes and the past came rushing back, uninvited, sharp as a blade. It always starts the same way, a sound, a smell, a flicker of something I've tried to forget. Tonight it was the stranger's voice at the church, that low, deliberate tone that stirred memories I'd buried deep. I was 22 when I left this town, though no one here remembers it that way. They think I've always been here, fading into the background of their lives. But I left. I had to. The recruiter found me at a diner just off the highway. My hands wrapped around a coffee mug, my eyes tired from working doubles to keep David out of trouble. He was a wiry man, plain clothes, no name, just a card, with a number and a look that said he saw something in me I didn't. "You're not meant for this place," he said. I laughed bitter, but I called the number. 2 weeks later, I was on a bus to a place that didn't exist on any map. Training was a crucible. They broke us down piece by piece until we were nothing but will and bone. I remember the mud, thick and cold, clinging to my boots as I ran through obstacle courses in the dark. The instructors shouted their voices like gunfire, telling us we'd fail, telling us we were weak. I wasn't the strongest, not the fastest, but I was stubborn. I'd learned that from raising David, from holding our family together when it wanted to shatter. They taught me things no one in this town could dream of: how to read a room in a glance, how to move without being seen, how to carry a secret so heavy it could crush you and still walk straight. There was a night early on when I almost quit. We were in the mountains, the air so thin it burned my lungs. They'd left me alone, no food, no water, just a knife and a map I couldn't read in the dark. The cold was a living thing, wrapping around me, whispering that I wasn't enough. I sat against a tree, my knees pulled to my chest, and thought of David, of the promises I'd made to keep him safe. I thought of my mother's voice, faint and fading, telling me I'd never be more than this town. But then I stood. I don't know why. Maybe it was spite. Maybe it was something deeper, something I didn't have a name for yet. I found my way back by dawn, my hands bloody, my body screaming. The instructor looked at me, his eyes narrow. "Taylor," he said, "you'll do." I was gone for years. Missions I can't talk about, places I can't name. I learned to speak languages that don't belong to this quiet life. I learned to listen to the silence between words, to hear the truth in what wasn't said. There were moments, brief, sharp, that I held onto like talismans. A child's hand in mine as I led her out of a burning village. A whispered thank you from a man whose life I'd saved, his eyes meeting mine, just long enough to matter. But there were other moments too. The weight of choices no one should make. The faces I couldn't save. The nights I woke, my heart racing, certain I'd never outrun the things I'd done. I came home when David needed me again. He was older then, harder, his eyes carrying the same shadows I saw in my own mirror. I told myself I'd stay a little while, help him find his feet. But a little while became years, and the Charlotte who'd walked through fire slipped away, tucked behind the woman who paid bills, bought groceries, smiled. When people asked how I was, no one asked where I'd been. No one noticed the way my hands still moved with precision, the way my eyes caught details others missed. I let them think I was nothing. It was easier that way, safer. Sometimes I forget I was ever anything else. I'll be washing dishes, the water warm against my skin, and I'll catch my reflection in the window, lined face, graying hair, a woman who blends into the wallpaper. And then a sound, a car backfiring, a door slamming too hard, will send my heart racing, my body shifting into a stance I haven't used in years. I'll stand there frozen, waiting for a threat that never comes. I'll laugh it off, tell myself it's nothing, but it's never nothing. It's who I am, locked away, where no one can see. I opened my eyes, the funeral program still in my lap. The rain had slowed, a soft drizzle, now tapping against the glass. I thought of the stranger at the church, his sharp eyes, his voice that knew more than it should. I'd heard voices like that before, in briefing rooms, in safe houses, in moments when the world hung by a thread. I told myself it was coincidence, that he was just a man who'd mistaken me for someone else. But my hands shook as I smoothed the program, my brother's name staring back at me. David, who never knew what I'd done for him, not really. David, who'd left me out of his story, just like everyone else. I stood, my knees stiff, and walked to the kitchen. The clock ticked steady and unyielding, marking the hours of a life no one saw. I poured a glass of water, the glass cool against my palm, and stared out the window into the dark. Sometimes I wonder if I'm still bound by those oaths. I took the ones that told me to keep silent, to disappear. Sometimes I wonder if I'm still waiting for permission to be seen. There was a mission once, one I can't tell you much about. But I remember a room small and dim, the air thick with cigarette smoke. I was young, barely 25, my hands steady, despite the fear clawing at my chest. The man across from me was important, someone whose name you'd know if I could say it. He looked at me, his eyes tired but kind, and said, "Taylor, you're the one we trust." I carried those words through every mission, through every moment I thought I'd break. They're still with me even now, buried under years of silence. I set the glass down the water untouched and moved to the living room. My bookshelf stood against the wall, a quiet testament to the life I've built here. I pulled a book down an old one, its pages yellowed. Tucked inside was a photograph, one I rarely looked at. Me younger, my hair pulled back. My eyes bright with something I've lost. I was standing with a team, their faces blurred by time and secrecy. We were somewhere hot, the sky behind us a merciless blue. I don't remember who took the picture. I don't remember why I kept it, but I held it now, my thumb brushing the edge, and felt the weight of who I'd been. The stranger's words came back to me. "We'll speak soon." My heart stuttered a warning I couldn't ignore. I slipped the photo back into the book and returned it to the shelf. I didn't know what was coming, but I felt it. The way you feel a storm before the sky breaks. I've always been good at sensing trouble. It's kept me alive. If you're still here, if you're listening, I need you to understand something. This story isn't just about me. It's about the parts of ourselves we hide, the pieces we bury to keep moving forward. It's about the weight of silence and what happens when it finally cracks. Hit that subscribe button because I'm not done yet. There's more to tell, more you need to hear. Not for me, but for the ones who've carried their secrets alone. The ones who've been forgotten, but never stopped fighting. I turned off the light, the room falling into darkness, and sat back in my chair. The rain was a whisper now, a soft lullaby against the windows. I closed my eyes, and the past was there waiting. I let it come, let it fill the quiet, let it remind me of who I was. Because something was coming and I needed to remember. The days after David's funeral blurred into each other gray and heavy, like the clouds that refused to lift. I woke early, as I always do, the house creaking around me, its familiar sounds, a quiet comfort. My routine was the same coffee, brewed in a pot older than most of the people in this town. A walk to the mailbox, a nod to the neighbor who never nodded back. I moved through my life like a ghost, seen, but not noticed, my presence expected, but never valued. That's how it's been for years now. Charlotte Taylor, the woman who's always there until you realize she isn't. I worked at the library, a small building at the edge of town, its shelves sagging under the weight of books no one read anymore. The job suited me, quiet, orderly, a place where silence was respected. I'd spend hours reshelving my fingers, brushing spines worn soft. By time my mind drifting to places I couldn't name aloud. People came and went, their voices low, their eyes skimming past me. "Morning, Charlotte," they'd say, if they said anything at all. I'd smile, nod, keep my hands busy. They didn't know I could hear the strain in their voices, the secrets they didn't say. I've always been good at listening to what's hidden. It's a habit I can't break. But there were moments sharp and sudden when the town's dismissal cut deeper than I wanted to admit. Like the day Karen came into the library, her heels clicking against the linoleum, her perfume sharp enough to drown out the dust. She was with a friend, a younger woman whose laugh was too loud for the room. They stood by the checkout desk, flipping through magazines, their voices carrying. "Charlotte's still here," Karen said, not bothering to lower her tone. "God, she's like furniture, always in the same spot, gathering dust." The friend laughed, a high, brittle sound. I was behind a shelf, a stack of books in my arms, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't move. I didn't let them see me. I've learned to stay still when the world wants to wound you. I waited until they left their laughter, fading into the parking lot before I stepped out. My hands shook as I shelved the books, my fingers fumbling with the titles. Spinster, burden, nobody. The words they used for me weren't new, but they stung all the same, like salt in a cut you thought had healed. I wanted to shout, to tell them they were wrong, to make them see. But I didn't. I never do. I straightened the books, smoothed my skirt, and went back to work. Silence is my shield, and I wield it well. It wasn't just Karen. The town had its own way of reminding me I didn't belong. At the grocery store, younger women would brush past me, their carts full, their voices bright with plans I'd never be part of. "Oh, Charlotte," one said, once her tone dripping with pity as she glanced at my basket, bread, milk, a single apple. "Still on your own, huh?" I smiled, nodded, paid for my things. What could I say? That I'd stood in rooms where lives were decided, that I'd carried secrets heavier than their gossip. They wouldn't believe me. They'd laugh, call me delusional, another sad story to whisper over coffee. But I was kind even when it hurt. I'd hold the door for the ones who ignored me, pick up the coins they dropped without expecting thanks. I'd listen to Mrs. Harlan, the widow who came to the library every Tuesday, her stories rambling, but her eyes desperate for someone to hear. I'd nod, smile, let her talk until she was ready to leave. I didn't do it for praise. I did it because I know what it's like to be unseen, to carry a weight no one acknowledges. I did it because kindness is the only thing I've never regretted. There were nights, though, when the weight of it all pressed too hard. I'd sit in my living room, the lamp casting soft shadows across the walls, and feel the loneliness like a physical thing, a stone lodged in my chest. I'd think of David, of the years I gave him, of the way he'd looked at me sometimes, like I was a stranger he didn't know how to thank. I'd think of the family who'd moved on without me, the cousins who bragged about their lives at reunions, their voices loud with achievements I'd never match. Not in their eyes, anyway. They didn't know about the missions, the lives saved the nights I'd stared down, fear, and won. They didn't know because I couldn't tell them. I'd taken an oath, and even now, years later, it held me like a chain. I kept a box under my bed, locked its contents hidden from the world. Sometimes, when the loneliness was too much, I'd pull it out, my hands steady despite the ache in my heart. Inside were fragments of that other life, a ribbon from a uniform, a letter with no signature, a small pin no one would recognize. I'd hold them, my fingers, tracing their edges, and remember, not the pain, not the fear, but the moments when I felt alive, when I knew I was more than this town could ever see. I'd close the box after lock it tight and push it back into the dark. That life was gone. I was Charlotte Taylor now, the woman who shelved books, who smiled through the barbs, who carried her secrets alone. The stranger from the funeral lingered in my mind, his voice a ghost I couldn't shake. I hadn't seen him since, but I felt him the way you feel a storm before it breaks. I'd catch myself glancing at the street, expecting to see him, his crisp suit out of place among the faded storefronts. I told myself it was nothing, just a tired mind playing tricks, but I'd learned long ago to trust my instincts, and they were whispering now, soft but insistent. Something was coming. I didn't know what, but I felt it in my bones, the way I'd felt danger in rooms far from here. One afternoon, I was at the library sorting returns when a group of women came in, Karen among them. They were planning a memorial for David, a community event to honor his life. They stood by the tables, their voices bright, their plans spilling out, like they owned the room. "We'll need speakers," one said, people who really knew him. Karen nodded her pen, tapping the notepad. His friends, his colleagues, the important ones. I was at the desk stamping books, my hands steady, but my heart twisting. Important ones, not me, never me, ever. I kept working, my face blank, but I heard every word. They talked about the event like it was a performance, a stage for their grief, their status. "We'll have the mayor say something," Karen said. "Maybe a band?" No one mentioned me, not even in passing. I was the sister who didn't exist, the one they'd written out of the story. I wanted to speak, to tell them I'd known David better than any of them, that I'd carried him when they hadn't. But I didn't. I stamped another book, the thud of the stamp loud in my ears. When they left, I stood there, the library empty, the air heavy with their absence. I felt small, smaller than I'd felt in years. But then I thought of Mrs. Harlan, of the way her eyes lit up when I listened. I thought of the pin in my box, the weight of it in my hand. I thought of the stranger, his voice promising something I didn't dare hope for. And I straightened my shoulders, squaring like they had in another life. I wasn't nothing. I'd never been nothing. I went back to work, my hands moving with purpose, my heart steadying. I didn't need their validation, not really. I'd survived worse than their dismissal. I'd walked through fire and come out whole. But the ache remained a quiet pulse beneath my skin. I wondered sometimes what it would feel like to be seen, to have them know who I'd been. I pushed the thought away, but it lingered stubborn as the rain that fell outside. If you're still with me, if you're listening, I need you to know this. This story is about more than pain. It's about the strength it takes to keep going, to hold your head high when the world wants you low. It's about the secrets we carry, the ones that shape us even when no one sees. Hit that subscribe button because there's more to come, more you need to hear. Not for me, but for the ones who've been called nothing and kept walking anyway. I locked the library that night, the stars sharp above me, and walked home in the dark. The town was quiet, but I felt it, the stir of something coming, the weight of a truth I wasn't ready to face. I kept walking my steps, steady my heart, ready for whatever lay ahead. The invitation came in a plain envelope, slipped into my mailbox like an afterthought. It was printed on heavy cardstock, the kind that feels like it's trying too hard, with David's name in bold letters across the top. A celebration of life. It read the words curling in elegant script, followed by a date, a time, and the name of the community center downtown. My name was nowhere on it. Not as family, not as a speaker, not even as a guest. Just the Taylor family in small print, as if I were a footnote they'd forgotten to erase. I held it in my hands, the paper cool against my fingers, and felt the familiar ache settle in my chest. I almost didn't go. I stood in my kitchen, the invitation on the counter, and stared at it for a long time. The house was quiet, the clock ticking its steady rhythm, the world outside soft, with late afternoon light. I thought of David, of the way he'd laugh when I'd scold him, his eyes bright with mischief, even when he was breaking my heart. I thought of the nights I'd stayed up waiting for him to come home, my hands clenched in prayer he didn't believe in. I thought of the program at his funeral, my name missing my place in his life erased. I didn't owe them this. I didn't owe them my presence, my silence, my grace. But I'd made a promise to him long ago to always show up, even when it hurt, even when no one else did. I dressed carefully that evening, choosing a navy dress I hadn't worn in years, its hem brushing my knees, its sleeves long enough to hide the scars no one knew to look for. I pinned my hair back my fingers, steady, despite the tremor in my heart. I looked in the mirror, my face lined, but composed my eyes, carrying a weight I couldn't set down. "You don't have to do this, Charlotte," I whispered, but I did. Not for Karen, not for the town, but for David. For the boy I'd raised, the man I'd loved, the brother who'd never known the half of what I'd done for him. The community center was lit up when I arrived, its windows glowing against the dusk cars crowding the lot like they were competing for space. I parked at the far end my old sedan, out of place among the gleaming SUVs. The air was cool, carrying the scent of cut grass and distant rain. I walked toward the entrance, my steps slow, my purse clutched tight. The doors were propped open, music spilling out, some soft instrumental that felt wrong for David, who'd loved loud guitars and barroom anthems. I hesitated, my hand on the doorframe, the weight of the evening pressing against me. I could leave, no one would notice, no one ever did. But I stepped inside. The room was full chairs, arranged in neat rows, a stage at the front with a podium, and a screen flashing photos of David, smiling young alive. People milled about, their voices a low hum, their clothes crisp with the effort of looking important. I recognized most of them neighbors, cousins, old friends of David's who hadn't spoken to me in years. Karen stood near the stage, her black dress replaced by a tailored blazer, her hair perfect, her smile practiced. She was holding court, shaking hands, accepting condolences, like she was the only one who'd lost him. I stayed near the back, my shoulders squared, my face calm. I've learned to blend in, to move through a room without drawing eyes. It's a skill I didn't choose, but mastered all the same. A woman I didn't know handed me a program, her smile polite but fleeting. I opened it, my heart sinking as I scanned the names, speakers, performers, honored guests, all listed in bold. My name wasn't there. Not as sister, not as family, not as anything. I folded the program, my fingers pressing the crease sharp, and slipped it into my purse. The ache in my chest grew, but I kept my face still, my breath even. I've carried worse than this. I've stood in places where pain was a currency, and I paid it without flinching. I found a seat in the back row tucked against the wall, the kind of spot no one fights for. The chair was hard, the cushion thin, but it suited me. I sat, my hands folded, my eyes on the stage. The room filled, people settling in, their voices bright with anticipation. I heard whispers, snippets of conversation that cut without meaning to. Karen's done so much for this, someone said. She's holding it together. Another voice lower. Did you see Charlotte still here, like always? I didn't look up. I didn't need to. I knew their faces, their pity, their dismissal. Spinster, nobody. The words were old, but they stung, each one a small wound I'd learned to ignore. The lights dimmed and the event began. The mayor took the stage, his voice booming through the microphone, talking about David's contributions to the community, his charm, his legacy. People nodded, clapped, their eyes misty. I sat still, my hands tight in my lap, my mind drifting to the David they didn't know, the one who'd call me at 3 a.m. His voice slurred, begging for help. The one who'd hug me after his arms tight, promising he'd do better. I wondered if they'd care, if they'd listen, if they'd see me as anything but the woman in the back row. Karen spoke next, her voice steady, her words polished. She talked about David's life, his loves, his dreams. She mentioned their marriage, their plans, their shared moments. She didn't mention me, not once. The crowd applauded, their hands loud in the small room. I felt the weight of their approval, their acceptance of a story that left me out. I wanted to stand, to walk out, to let the door slam behind me. But I stayed. I always stay. Then came the others, friends, colleagues, people who'd known David in passing. They told stories, some true, some stretched to fit the moment. A young woman, maybe 30, took the stage, her dress bright against the somber mood. She was a coworker of David's, she said, her voice confident, her smile wide. He was like a brother to me, she said, and the crowd murmured, touched. I closed my eyes, the word brother cutting deeper than I expected. I was his sister. I was the one who'd carried him, who'd sacrificed, who'd loved him when it was hard. But she was the one they clapped for, the one they saw. I opened my eyes, my gaze drifting to the back of the room. That's when I saw him, the stranger from the funeral. He was standing near the door, his suit as crisp as before, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning the crowd. My heart stuttered a warning I couldn't ignore. He wasn't here by chance. I knew that now, the way I'd known things in another life, when instincts were all that kept me alive. His gaze met mine, brief but deliberate, and then he looked away, his expression unreadable. I gripped the edge of my chair, my knuckles white. Something was coming. I felt it the way you feel, the air shift before a storm. The event dragged on, more speakers, more stories, more applause. For a version of David I barely recognized. I sat through it all, my face a mask, my heart heavy. At one point, Karen's friend, the one from the library, leaned over to someone. Nearby, her voice low but clear. Charlotte's here, why she's got no place in this. The words landed like a blow, but I didn't flinch. I've learned to take hits without showing the bruise. I kept my eyes forward, my hands, still, my silence louder than their whispers. When the speeches ended, the crowd stood moving toward a reception area with tables of food and wine. I stayed seated, watching them go, their laughter filling the space I'd never occupy. I could leave now, slip out the back, let the night swallow me whole. But I didn't. I stood smoothing my dress and moved toward the reception, my steps slow but steady. I didn't know why I stayed. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was defiance. Maybe it was the stranger, his presence a thread I couldn't let go of. I stood at the edge of the room, a glass of water in my hand, watching the crowd. Karen was there smiling, accepting hugs, her grief a performance I didn't believe. The young woman from the stage was nearby, her laughter bright, her confidence, a contrast to my quiet. I felt their eyes, their judgment, their dismissal. But I felt something else too, a spark, small but stubborn, deep in my chest. I wasn't nothing. I'd never been nothing. And somewhere in the shadows of this room, someone knew it. If you're still here, if you're listening, I need you to hold on. This story is about more than being overlooked. It's about the strength it takes to stand in a room that doesn't see you to carry a truth no one knows. Hit that subscribe button, because the next part is coming and it's not what you expect. Not for me, but for the ones who've been pushed to the edges, the ones who've kept going anyway. I set my glass down my hand, steady, and glanced at the door. The stranger was gone, but his presence lingered, a promise, or a threat I couldn't name. I straightened my shoulders back and waited. Something was about to break. I could feel it. The reception hummed with voices, a tide of laughter and clinking glasses that filled the community center's dim corners. I stood at the edge, my water glass cold against my palm, my eyes tracing the crowd without settling. Karen moved through the room like a queen, her smile bright, her grief. A polished act that drew nods and soft touches from those around her. The young woman from the stage, David's coworker, the one who'd called him brother, was laughing with a group near the food table, her voice cutting through the murmur like a bell. I was invisible to them, a shadow in a navy dress, my presence as unremarkable as the folding chairs lining the walls. I'd grown used to it, this fading into the background. But tonight something felt different, a current in the air I couldn't name. I glanced toward the door again, half expecting to see the stranger from the funeral, his crisp suit and sharp eyes out of place among the small-town mourners. He wasn't there, but the memory of his voice. "We'll speak soon," lingered a low hum in my chest. I told myself it was nothing, just a tired mind weaving stories. But I'd learned long ago to trust the prickle at the back of my neck, the instinct that had kept me alive in places these people couldn't imagine. I set my glass on a nearby table, my hand steady, and straightened my shoulders, squaring out of habit. Whatever was coming, I'd face it. I always had. The crowd shifted, a ripple of movement near the entrance, and the room's noise softened like a radio turned low. Heads turned, eyes darting toward the doors. I followed their gaze, my breath catching as a man stepped inside. He was tall, his presence commanding, his marine uniform, immaculate dark blue metals glinting under the fluorescent lights, his cover tucked under his arm. A major. I noted the silver oak leaves on his shoulders catching the light. His face was weathered but kind, his eyes scanning the room with a purpose that made my pulse quicken. The air changed, charged with a weight I recognized from another life, when rooms fell silent and decisions carried the scent of fate. Karen noticed him first, her smile widening as she moved toward him, her hand extended. Her voice smooth. "Welcome, sir, we're so honored." He raised a hand, polite but firm, cutting her off mid-sentence. Her smile faltered, and a murmur ran through the crowd. He didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge the hands reaching out the whispers of recognition. His eyes kept searching, steady and deliberate, as if he knew exactly who he was here for. I stood frozen, my heart thudding, a warning I couldn't ignore. I'd seen men like him before, in briefing rooms, in safe houses, in moments when the world hung by a thread. He moved through the room, his steps measured the crowd, parting like water. People stared, their voices hushed, their curiosity a palpable thing. Karen trailed behind, her face tight, her composure slipping. The young woman from the stage watched, her laughter gone, her eyes wide with something like awe. I stayed where I was, my hands clasped in front of me, my body still but my mind racing. I didn't know why he was here, didn't know what he wanted, but I felt it. The same instinct that had guided me through missions I couldn't name, through nights when silence was my only ally. Then his eyes found mine. The room seemed to shrink, the noise fading to a distant hum. He stopped his gaze, locking onto me, and for a moment I was somewhere else, somewhere loud, with the roar of engines, sharp with the tang of sweat, and fear alive with the weight of choices no one in this room could fathom. I blinked, forcing myself back to the present, my breath shallow. He started toward me, his steps deliberate, his presence a force that made the air heavier. The crowd watched, confused, their whispers growing. "Who's he looking at?" someone murmured. "What's going on?" Karen's face was pale now, her hands twisting at her sides. He stopped in front of me, close enough that I could see the lines around his eyes, the faint scar along his jaw. The room was silent now, every eye on us, the weight of their attention, like a physical thing. I kept my face calm, my hands steady, though my heart was a drum in my chest. He studied me, his expression unreadable, but his eyes warm, almost reverent. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low but clear, carrying through the room. "We've been looking for you." The words landed like a stone in still water ripples, spreading through the crowd. I felt their stares, their confusion, their sudden curiosity. Karen's mouth opened, then closed her eyes, darting between me and the major. The young woman from the stage took a step forward, her brow furrowed, as if she couldn't make sense of what she was seeing. I wanted to shrink, to slip away, to let the moment pass without me. But I couldn't. Not now. Not with his eyes on me. His voice naming me, in a way I hadn't been named in years. "Sir," I said, my voice soft but steady. "I think you've mistaken me for someone else." It was a reflex, a way to deflect, to keep the truth buried where it belonged. I'd spent years hiding, letting the world see only Charlotte Taylor, the nobody, the spinster, the woman who didn't matter. But he shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips, and I saw it then, the recognition, the certainty, the weight of something shared. "No mistake, ma'am," he said, his voice firmer, now laced with a respect that made my throat tighten. "Charlotte Taylor, we know exactly who you are." The room froze. I felt it, the shift, the way the air thickened, the way their whispers died. Karen's face was a mask of shock, her hands still, her eyes wide. The young woman's laughter was gone, her confidence replaced by something else, doubt maybe, or fear. The crowd leaned in their curiosity, a living thing, their assumptions about me, cracking like thin ice. I stood there, my hands clasped my face, composed, but inside I was unraveling. I'd kept my secrets for so long, locked them away, where no one could touch them. But this man, this major, was pulling them into the light, and I didn't know how to stop him. He turned slightly, addressing the room, now his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being heard. "This woman," he said, gesturing to me, "has done things most of us can't imagine. Things that saved lives, things that changed the course of history." The words hung in the air, heavy, impossible. I saw the disbelief on their faces, the way they looked at me plain. Charlotte, tired Charlotte, the woman they'd dismissed for years, and tried to reconcile it with what he was saying. I wanted to speak, to tell him to stop, to let me stay hidden, but my voice caught trapped behind the weight of years spent silent. Karen stepped forward, her voice sharp, almost desperate. "I'm sorry, Major, but there must be some confusion. Charlotte's she's family, but she's not." She stopped, her words faltering under his gaze. He didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her interruption. His eyes stayed on me, steady, grounding, like he was anchoring me to a truth I'd tried to forget. "No confusion," he said, his voice softer, now meant for me. "We've been trying to find you for a long time, ma'am. To thank you, to honor you." He paused, his eyes searching mine, and I saw it then, the gratitude, the respect, the weight of a debt I didn't know I'd carried. My chest ached, a quiet crack in the armor I'd built. I'd spent so long being nothing, letting the world see only what it wanted. But this man saw me. He saw Charlotte Taylor, the woman I'd been, the woman I still was. The crowd was silent now, their eyes on me, their judgment suspended. I felt exposed, raw, like a wound laid bare. But I didn't look away. I met his gaze, my shoulders straight, my heart steadying. I didn't know what came next, didn't know what he'd say, but I felt the shift inside me, a spark small but fierce. The same one that had carried me through missions, through pain, through years of being unseen. If you're still here, if you're listening, I need you to hold on. This moment, this turning point, is where everything changes. It's not about glory or revenge, it's about truth. The kind that burns through silence and demands to be seen. Hit that subscribe button because the story's not over. There's more to come, more you need to hear. Not for me, but for the ones who've been overlooked, the ones who've carried their strength in the dark. I stood there, the Major's eyes on me, the room holding its breath. Something was breaking open, and I wasn't sure I was ready. But I didn't look away. I couldn't, not anymore. The Major's words hung in the air, heavy as the silence that followed. Charlotte Taylor, we know exactly who you are. My name spoken with such weight felt foreign, like it belonged to someone I'd left behind. The community center was still the crowd's eyes pinning me in place, their curiosity sharp enough to cut. Karen stood frozen, her hands clenched, her face a mask of disbelief. The young woman who'd called David her brother stared, her confidence unraveling, her mouth slightly open. I wanted to disappear, to slip through the cracks of this moment, and let the shadows take me. But the Major's gaze held me steady and sure, and I couldn't look away. Sir, I said again, my voice barely above a whisper, I'm not who you think. It was a lie, and we both knew it. I'd spent years hiding, letting the world see only the Charlotte they expected, quiet, plain, forgettable. But his eyes, warm and unwavering, saw through the mask. He shook his head, a faint smile, softening the lines of his face, and I felt the ground shift beneath me. I'd kept my secrets so long, they'd become part of me, woven into my bones. Now they were being pulled into the light, and I wasn't ready. He turned to the crowd, his posture straight, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd faced worse than their whispers. This woman, he said, his hand gesturing toward me, is not just Charlotte Taylor. She is Captain Charlotte Taylor, codename Sparrow, one of the finest operatives this country has ever known. The room gasped, a collective intake of breath that made the air tremble. Captain, Sparrow. The words were a key, unlocking a door I'd bolted shut years ago. My heart thudded loud in my ears as the crowd's eyes widened, their murmurs rising like a tide. Karen's face drained of color, her hands twisting at her sides. The young woman took a step back, her eyes darting between me and the Major as if she could rewrite what she'd heard. I stood there, my hands clasped so tightly, my knuckles ached, my face composed but my mind reeling. I wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, to tell them it was a mistake. But the truth was out, and it was heavier than I remembered. Captain Taylor, the Major, continued, his voice softer, now meant for me as much as the room served in operations most of you will never read about. She saved lives, hundreds, maybe thousands. She put herself in harm's way so others could come home. And she did it without asking for recognition, without expecting a single word of thanks. He paused, his eyes meeting mine, and I saw it then, the gratitude, the respect, the weight of a debt I hadn't known I carried. My throat tightened, a quiet crack in the armor I'd worn for years. I shook my head, my voice low. That was a long time ago, sir. I'm just Charlotte now. I meant it. I'd left that life behind, buried it under years of silence, of library shifts and small-town scorn. I'd let them call me spinster nobody because it was easier than carrying the weight of who I'd been. But the Major didn't waver. He stepped closer, his voice dropping meant only for me. You're still Sparrow, ma'am. You always will be. The room was silent now, the kind of silence that presses against your skin. I felt their eyes, their shock, their sudden need to reframe me. The woman they'd ignored, the one they'd left off programs and pushed to the back, was someone they couldn't comprehend. I saw Karen's hands tremble, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. The young woman's face was pale, her earlier confidence gone, replaced by something like shame. The crowd leaned in their whispers dead, their assumptions shattered. And then I was somewhere else. It was a memory sharp and vivid, pulling me out of the room and into a night I'd tried to forget. I was 30, crouched in a dusty alley, the air thick with the smell of smoke and fear. The mission was simple on paper: extract a group of civilians from a war zone before the bombs fell. But nothing was simple in that place. The streets were a maze, the enemy closing in their voices loud with rage. I was leading a team, my voice steady, despite the fear clawing at my chest. "Move fast, stay low," I'd said, my eyes scanning the dark. We found them 8 civilians, including a girl no older than 10, her eyes wide with terror. Her mother clutched her hand, whispering prayers I couldn't understand. The bombs were closer now, the ground shaking, the sky lit with fire. My team was tired, outnumbered, but I didn't let them see my doubt. "We're getting them out," I said, my voice a lifeline. I took the girl's hand, her fingers small and cold, in mine, and led the way. The alley was narrow, the walls crumbling under gunfire. One of my men went down, his blood warm against my hands as I dragged him to cover. I didn't think, didn't feel, just moved. I gave orders, my voice sharp, my mind clear, despite the chaos. We fought our way through step by step, the girl's hand never leaving mine. When we reached the extraction point, the helicopter's blades were a roar, the dust choking us. I lifted the girl in her mother, sobbing, her arms tight around me for a moment, before she followed. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. I nodded, my face blank, my heart pounding. We got them out, all 8 plus my team, though not all of us came back whole. I carried the wounded man to the chopper, his weight heavy against my shoulder, his blood soaking my uniform. I didn't stop, didn't let myself feel the pain in my side, the burn of a graze I hadn't noticed. When we lifted off the city burning below us, I looked at the girl, her face pressed against her mother's chest. She was safe. They all were. That was enough. I blinked, the memory fading, the community center coming back into focus. The major was watching me, his eyes knowing, as if he'd seen the same fire I had. I realized then he'd been there or somewhere like it. He knew what it cost, what it meant to carry those moments alone. My chest ached, a quiet sob I wouldn't let out. I'd buried that night, that mission so deep I thought it was gone. But it was still there in my spine, in my hands, in the way I stood even now. The major turned to the crowd again, his voice steady. Captain Taylor's actions in Operation Nightshade saved lives that night. One of those lives was mine. The room gasped again, softer this time, a sound of awe. I stared at him, my breath catching. I hadn't known, I'd never known. I'd done my job, gotten out, moved on. But his eyes held mine, and I saw the truth. He was the wounded man I'd carried, the one I'd refused to leave behind. Without her, he said, his voice breaking slightly, I'd be in a casket too. My family would have lost me. This country would have lost countless others. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room, daring them to question it. She's a hero, and it's time she was recognized. The silence was deafening, the crowd's eyes on me, their disbelief shifting to something else, reverence maybe, or regret. Karen's face was a mask of shock, her hands still, her eyes wet with something I couldn't name. The young woman looked down her shoulders, hunched as if she could hide from what she'd heard. I stood there, my heart exposed, my secrets laid bare. I wanted to run, to hide, to be Charlotte the nobody again, but I couldn't. Not anymore. I lifted my chin, my voice soft but clear. I did my duty, sir, that's all. It was the truth, the only one I had. I'd never wanted medals, never wanted praise. I'd wanted to do what was right, to keep people safe, to come home to David and pretend I was whole. But the major shook his head, his smile warm, and I felt the weight of his words settle into me, heavy but not unwelcome. The room was still, the crowd waiting, the air thick with a truth they couldn't unhear. I felt their eyes, their questions, their sudden need to know me. But I kept my gaze on the major, his presence a lifeline in a moment I hadn't prepared for. Something had broken open, and I wasn't sure what came next. But for the first time in years, I felt seen, not as the spinster, not as the nobody, but as Charlotte Taylor Sparrow, the woman who'd carried fire and come out alive. If you're still here, if you're listening, I need you to understand. This isn't about glory. It's about the truth, the kind that lives in your bones, the kind that finds you when you least expect it. Hit that subscribe button because the story's not done. There's more to tell, more you need to hear. Not for me, but for the ones who've carried their secrets in silence, the ones who've been more than the world could see. I stood there, the major's words echoing the crowd's eyes on me. The truth was out, and there was no going back. The major's words settled over the room, like dust after a storm, heavy and impossible to ignore. The community center, once loud with chatter and clinking glasses, was now a cathedral of silence, every eye fixed on me. I stood there, my hands still clasped my navy dress, suddenly feeling too small for the woman they now saw, Captain Charlotte Taylor, Sparrow, Hero. The titles hung around me, unfamiliar after years of being nobody, and I wanted to shrug them off, to slip back into the shadows where I'd lived so long. But the major's gaze held me in place, his respect a weight I couldn't escape. The crowd stirred, a ripple of movement breaking the stillness. An older man near the front stood first, his hands fumbling with his tie, his eyes wet with something like awe. He nodded at me, a small gesture, but it felt like a salute. Then another rose, a woman I recognized from the grocery store. Her face flushed, her hands clasped as if in prayer. One by one they stood their chairs, scraping softly against the floor, their silence louder than applause. I felt their eyes, not with pity or scorn now, but with something new. Reverence maybe, or shame for what they'd missed. My chest tightened, a quiet ache I didn't know how to name. Karen was still near the stage, her face pale, her hands twisting the edge of her blazer. She hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, but her eyes were on me, wide and unblinking, like she was seeing me for the first time. The young woman who'd called David, her brother, her name was Emily. I remembered now, stood frozen, her earlier confidence gone. Her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The crowd standing felt like a wave, pulling them all into a moment they hadn't expected. And I was the center, the eye of a storm I hadn't meant to start. The major stepped closer, his voice low, meant for me alone. "Ma'am, if you'll allow me." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box, its surface worn but polished like something carried for years. My breath caught a warning in my throat. I knew what it was before he opened it, a medal, its ribbon folded neatly. Its metal catching the light. I shook my head, my voice barely a whisper. "Sir, I don't need that. I never did. I'd done my duty for the lives I'd saved, not for recognition, not for a piece of metal to pin to my chest." But his eyes were steady, his smile gentle, and I saw the resolve in him, the need to make this right. "This isn't just for you, Captain," he said, his voice carrying, now reaching the crowd. "It's for all of us, to remember what you did, to honor it." He opened the box, revealing the medal, a distinguished service cross, its star gleaming, its ribbon red and blue. The room murmured a soft sound of awe, and I felt their eyes sharpen, their understanding deepen. I wanted to protest, to tell him to put it away, but my voice failed me. He stepped forward, his hands careful, and pinned the medal to my dress just above my heart. The weight of it was small but profound, like a stone dropped into still water. He stepped back and saluted, his hand crisp against his brow, his eyes never leaving mine. The gesture was a bridge connecting the Charlotte I'd buried to the woman standing here now. I returned the salute, my hand moving on instinct, steady, despite the tremor in my heart. The room watched their silence, a heartbeat, and I felt the moment seal itself into me, not as triumph, but as truth. I'd never wanted this, but it was mine all the same. The crowd began to move, their hesitation, gone their need to connect, pulling them toward me. An older woman, her hair gray and her hands trembling, reached out her fingers brushing my arm. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "For what you did?" I knotted my throat tight, unsure what to say. A man I'd seen at the library, always quiet, always alone, shook my hand. His grip firm, his eyes bright with respect. "I had no idea," he said, and I heard the regret in his voice, the wish that he'd seen me sooner. I smiled, small but genuine, and let the moment pass. Words were never my strength. Silence always was. Then Karen was there, her steps hesitant, her face a map of emotions she couldn't hide. She stopped in front of me, her hands twisting, her eyes wet. "Charlotte," she said, her voice breaking. I didn't know. I'm so sorry." The words were raw, jagged, like they'd been pulled from somewhere deep. I looked at her, the woman who'd dismissed me, who'd left me off programs, who'd called me furniture. I saw the shame in her eyes, the regret, the need for forgiveness. Part of me wanted to turn away, to let her carry the weight of her words. But I'd carried enough pain for a lifetime, and I was tired of adding to it. "It's all right," I said, my voice soft but steady. "You couldn't have known." It wasn't absolution, not entirely, but it was enough. Her eyes filled, and she nodded, stepping back, her hands still twisting. I didn't need her apology, not really. I'd survived worse than her dismissal. But the moment was hers to carry now, and I let her take it. Emily approached next her steps, slow, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Ms. Taylor," she started, her voice small. I shouldn't have said those things. About David, about you." She looked down, her hands fidgeting, her earlier bravado gone. I remembered her on the stage claiming David as her brother, her words cutting me without her knowing. I could have been sharp, could have let her feel the sting of her mistake. But I didn't. I'd learned long ago that pain doesn't heal by passing it on. "You loved him," I said, my voice gentle. "That's enough." Her eyes met mine, surprised, grateful, and she nodded, stepping away, with a weight lifted but not erased. I watched her go, my heart steady, my silence louder than any words I could have spoken. The major stayed nearby, his presence a quiet anchor as others came forward, neighbors, cousins, people I'd passed 1,000 times without a second glance. They spoke, their voices soft, their words a mix of gratitude and regret. "We should have known," one said. "You were always so quiet." Another added, as if silence were a crime I'd committed. I nodded, smiled, let their words wash over me without sinking in. I didn't need their approval, not now, not ever. But I saw the change in their eyes, the way they looked at me, not as Charlotte, the nobody, but as Charlotte, the hero. Charlotte, the woman who'd carried fire and come out whole. The event's tone had shifted, the polished grief replaced by something rawer, truer. People spoke in hushed tones, now their stories of David. Quieter their focus on me, a weight I hadn't asked for. The major stood by the stage, speaking to a few who approached him, his answers brief but kind. I caught his eye once, and he nodded, a small gesture that felt like a promise. He'd done what he came to do, and now it was mine to carry. I touched the metal on my dress, its metal cool against my fingers, and felt the years collapse, the missions, the nights, the choices I'd made in the dark. I'd never wanted this moment, never wanted their eyes or their words. But standing here with the room around me, I felt something shift, a quiet justice, not in their regret, but in the truth that had finally found me. I'd been seen not for what they'd made me, but for what I'd always been. The reception wound down, the crowd, thinning the air softer now. I stayed until the end, my hands steady, my heart full but calm. The major approached one last time, his cover back under his arm, his eyes warm. "You did good, Sparrow," he said, his voice low. "You always did." I knotted my throat tight and watched him go, his steps steady, as he disappeared into the night. If you're still here, if you're listening, I need you to know this isn't about the applause or the medals. It's about the moment when the truth steps into the light, when the silence you've carried becomes a voice. Hit that subscribe button, because there's one more part to this story, one more truth you need to hear. Not for me, but for the ones who've stood in the shadows, the ones who've been more than the world could see. I stood alone now, the room emptying the metal, a quiet weight against my heart. I didn't feel triumph, didn't feel pride. I felt whole for the first time in years. And that was enough. The night air was cool against my skin. As I left the community center, the stars sharp above me. The town quiet in a way it hadn't been hours before. The metal pinned to my dress caught the streetlight, a faint gleam I could feel more than see. My steps were slow, deliberate, the gravel crunching softly under my heels. The world felt different now, though nothing had changed. Not the faded storefronts, not the hum of crickets, not the silhouette of my small house waiting at the end of the road. But I was different. Not louder, not prouder, just whole. For the first time in years, I carried myself without the weight of being unseen. I walked home, the navy dress swaying against my knees, the memory of the evening still warm in my chest. The major's voice his salute, the crowd's eyes shifting from pity to reverence it played in my mind. Like a song I hadn't known I remembered. Karen's apology. Emily's shame, the hands that reached for mine, they were real, but they weren't what mattered. What mattered was the truth, laid bare after years of silence. Not for their sake, but for mine. I'd spent so long hiding, letting the world name me spinster, nobody nothing. Now the name Charlotte Taylor Captain Sparrow felt like it belonged to me again. The house was dark when I stepped inside, the familiar creak of the door greeting me like an old friend. I didn't turn on the light, not yet. I stood in the living room, the shadows soft around me, and let the quiet settle. My purse was still in my hand, heavy with the program I'd folded, the one that hadn't named me. I set it on the table next to the books I'd read too many times and touched the metal on my dress. It was small, unassuming, but its weight was a reminder, not of glory, but of choices made in the dark of lives, saved of a woman who'd walked through fire and come out whole. I moved to the bedroom, my steps soft against the worn floorboards, and knelt by the bed. The box was still there, locked and hidden its contents, a secret I'd guarded for years. I pulled it out my hands steady and opened it, the hinges creaking faintly. Inside were the fragments of that other life, the ribbon, the letter, the pin, each one a piece of Sparrow. I lifted the pin, its edges cool against my fingers, and held it for a moment, my eyes tracing its shape. It was a small thing, unmarked, meaningless to anyone else. But to me it was a key to a life I'd thought was gone. I set the pin back and reached for something else, a folded flag tucked carefully at the bottom of the box. It wasn't one I'd been given, not officially. It was from a mission one I couldn't name, one that had ended with more questions than answers. I'd kept it though I didn't know why, its stars and stripes a quiet testament to the oaths I'd taken. I unfolded it now, my hands moving with care, the fabric soft but heavy. I held it against my chest, my breath slow, and let the memories come. Not the pain, not the fear, but the moments when I'd felt alive, when I'd known who I was. I folded the flag again, my fingers precise. Each crease a ritual I hadn't forgotten. I placed it back in the box alongside the pin, the letter, the ribbon, and closed the lid. The lock clicked a soft sound in the quiet, and I slid the box under the bed. I didn't need to carry those things anymore, not in my hands. They lived in me, in my spine, in the way I walked, in the way I breathed. I'd spent years thinking I had to hide them to protect the world from a truth it wasn't ready for. But the truth had found me, and I was still standing. The next morning I woke early, the light filtering through my curtains, the house humming with its usual sounds. I made coffee, the pot hissing softly, and sat at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around the mug. The metal was on the counter, where I'd left it the night before, its ribbon folded neatly. I didn't need to wear it, didn't need to show it to anyone. It was enough that it existed, that it had been given, that someone had seen me. I sipped my coffee, the warmth steadying me, and thought of the library of the shelves waiting for my hands of the life I'd built here. It wasn't loud, wasn't grand, but it was mine. I went back to work that day, my steps light, my navy dress replaced by a simple blouse and skirt. The library was the same sagging shelves, dusty air, the hum of a world that moved slowly. But the people were different. Mrs. Harlan, the widow who came every Tuesday, looked at me with new eyes, her smile softer, her stories shorter, as if she wanted to give me space to speak. I didn't, not really. I nodded, listened, let her talk, but I felt the change in her, the respect that hadn't been there before. Others came too, neighbors, patrons, people who'd passed me 1,000 times without a word. They'd pause at the desk, their voices hesitant, their eyes searching. I heard about the memorial, one said. I had no idea, Charlotte. I smiled, nodded, kept my hands busy. I didn't need their words, but I let them have their moment. The town talked, of course. Whispers followed me at the grocery store, the post office, the street where I walked each morning. Did you hear about Charlotte? They'd say, their voices low, but loud enough to reach me. A hero right here. I didn't listen, didn't let it sink in. I'd never done it for them, never wanted their awe. I'd done it for the girl in the alley, for the man I'd carried, for the lives I couldn't name. I'd done it for David, even when he didn't know. I'd done it for myself because it was right. Karen called once, her voice, trembling through the phone, asking to meet, to talk, to make things right. I told her it was fine, that we were fine, and meant it. I didn't need her regret, didn't need her to rewrite the past. Emily came to the library, her face flushed, a book in her hands she didn't need. "I'm sorry, Ms. Taylor," she said again, her eyes down. I nodded, handed her the book, told her it was okay. It was. I'd carried worse than their mistakes, and I was done carrying grudges. The days turned to weeks, the whispers fading, the town settling back into its rhythm. But I was changed, not in ways anyone could see, but in the quiet of my heart. I walked taller, my shoulders straighter, my eyes meeting the world without apology. I didn't need to explain myself, didn't need to prove who I'd been. The truth lived in me, steady and sure, and that was enough. One evening, I sat on my porch, the air cooled, the sky painted with the last of the sunset. The medal was in my drawer, now tucked away, with the letters I never sent, the photos I rarely looked at. The flag was still in its box, but I didn't need to hold it to feel its weight. I watched the street, the lights flickering on the world moving forward. I thought of the major, of his salute, of the girl in the alley whose hand I'd held. I thought of David, of the promises I'd kept, of the love that had carried me through. And I thought of you, the ones watching this, the ones who've stayed with me through this story. I need you to hear this, to carry it with you when the screen goes dark. You don't need to explain your past to anyone. It lives in your spine, in the way you stand, in the choices you make when no one's watching. You don't need their applause, their approval, their eyes. You are enough just as you are, with every scar, every secret, every quiet strength you've carried alone. I stood, my hands brushing the porch railing, and walked to the door. I paused, my hand on the knob, and looked back at the street one last time. The stars were brighter now, the night soft and full of promise. I stepped inside, my head high, made my heart steady. The door closed behind me, a soft click in the quiet, and I knew I was home, not just in this house, but in myself. If you've made it this far, if you've listened, I need you to do one last thing. Hit that subscribe button, not for me, but for the ones who've been overlooked, the ones whose stories deserve to be heard. This isn't the end, it's a beginning. A reminder that the truth always finds its way, that you are more than the world can see. I turned off the porch light, the house falling into darkness, and smiled. The silence was mine now, not a shield, but a friend. And that was enough.